Hello! Welcome to episode 6 of Worldwide Battle Royale. When I was recording the last one, I thought it would be long. It ended up being the shortest episode so far, I believe. But if you missed it, then basically the last episode was basically just a bunch of countries eating their puppet states, as well as two new alliances forming. So with that, let's get right into episode 6. So, Korea has been slowly recovering from their nuclear strikes, and they have some magic technology that allows them to basically just erase all the radiation by now. So they've fully recovered from being nuclearized, and they've also fully integrated North Korea now. And so they're now a pretty strong country that a lot of people want to get on their side. Meanwhile, China is trying to find new allies, and South Korea and China, the old allies from the old Pink Alliance, look at each other and they realize they could do pretty well together. And so they create their own alliance, and Japan will also finally do something by joining this alliance as well. A strong China is not something that India or Russia want, but unfortunately, India and Russia now kind of hate each other, and they can't team up to stop China from regaining some allies. And they're continuing to gain allies as Indonesia has now joined the Chinese alliance. This puts Australia at risk, as well as Malaysia. And all of a sudden, tensions are really high between India and China. This time, India is much stronger and China much weaker, which could be kind of catastrophic. For now, though, let's go back to the Mediterranean, where the Arabian Alliance, I guess I'll call them, is continuing to work their magic. And they managed to get Albania to join their alliance. And then they managed to get Italy to join their alliance. And this is huge, because Italy is now pretty much tied for the strongest country in their alliance with the Levant. And this alliance is growing in power alarmingly quickly. And finally, just because pretty much all of the other alliances in the world just don't like this new alliance, they all have a secret meeting in Paris, and they all agree that they are just going to deal with this alliance once and for all right now. Paris will obviously also be on this war despite not being in any of these alliances. Right away, Libya starts getting invaded by Egypt. They were ready to do this, and now that the entire alliance is being invaded, this isn't going to go too well for Libya. However, the Levant was ready for this, and they immediately seized the Sinai, as well as the Suez, and start threatening the mainland the populated portions of Egypt. Meanwhile, Nigeria's alliance starts going into Algeria, and Algeria didn't want this, so they try suing for peace, and they actually managed to get Nigeria's alliance to withdraw in exchange for some reparations. But the U.S. is still pissed at them, and they order Morocco to send troops into Algeria no matter what. Unfortunately for Algeria, pretty much all their populated land is captured, and then Nigeria is like, you know what, screw it, and they send their troops back in, as well as some into Libya. Let's just say things are not currently going well. In Italy, Paris starts sending some troops into Italy, and Italy starts fighting back. Russia's alliance is staying neutral in this war, but Spain will seize Sardinia and Corsica, as well as start invading over here, until I think there's a small mountain range here, so that'll stop them for a little while. But Algeria has just capitulated to the U.S., which is not good, as that allows them to start invading into Tunisia, and Tunisia will make the smart decision to surrender. Italy is continuing to fight, though, which is not good for them because they just lost their Alpine region to Paris. Switzerland might or might not be breaking their neutrality there. And now most of their northern regions, which are the richer regions of the country, are getting taken, as Sicily is made a landing on. And seeing something happening over again, Italy will sue for peace. Albania is like, what the hell am I doing? And they leave. Libya has fully just surrendered. This war is just not going well for the Arabian Alliance, as finally they can all turn onto the Levant, and they're like the head of the alliance pretty much. So Egypt rids themselves of this and starts invading into the main portion of the Levant. The Saudi puppet state, seeing what's going on, breaks away and starts taking back their old territories, as well as invading into Yemen. Ethiopia also starts an invasion into Yemen, and even Oman starts invading into their neighbors, as well as Iran. And Russia is kind of regretting their decision to stay neutral, but they're still standing by it. The Levant is refusing to surrender, and actually their whole thing gets taken by this point. And Saudi Arabia is doing actually quite well. They start invading into Iraq, and just overall, they pretty much carved out like a thing for themselves. They zoom over here, which interrupts Iran and Oman from collaborating with each other, but it guarantees that they'll have a coast in the Persian Gulf, which is nice. Yemen decides to capitulate. This area of Iraq obviously falls. Whatever's left of the Levant is no longer Levantine territory, and the leader is killed, and the whole thing just kind of collapses to Saudi Arabia. Turkey takes all their territory back, and Iraq capitulates, hoping they'll preserve their country, but they probably won't. If you'll remember, Madagascar was also in this alliance. They just peacefully leave. And these are the new borders of what used to be the Dark Blue Alliance. Algeria is made into an American puppet. Tunisia is created as a buffer state because no one wanted anyone to get Tunisia. Libya is actually fully liberated on the condition that they join the Pink Alliance. Yemen is reduced to a puppet state. Saudi Arabia becomes huge and becomes a buffer state. Oman becomes pretty big. Nigeria gets all of the Algerian desert because they want to look big on a map instead of actually getting powerful. Spain takes a bunch of islands from Italy. Paris takes a bit of land. Russia might have been really smart by playing it neutral because Albania and Italy both decide to join Russia, as well as Tunisia and Madagascar. So all of the countries from the Dark Blue Alliance that survived decide to join Russia's alliance because they decided to stay neutral. They could have joined China's hypothetically, but China is too far away. So Russia just got a lot more powerful by doing pretty much nothing. As for Paris, they'll decide to join Nigeria's alliance. And this is probably going to be one of the last wars in this series that doesn't have an alliance, but Greece is going to invade into North Macedonia, and they will fully annex it. Shortly thereafter, Slovenia will get invaded into by Italy, Austria, and Poland. And Russia's alliance just keeps growing ever stronger. Okay, now we're going to go to the main event of this episode, because this is pretty much the main event. This event is probably going to take over the whole episode. So this event will start with the United Kingdom deciding that they want to invade into Ireland. And obviously before they do this, they coordinate with the US. And the US is upset that Ireland's been trying to exercise some independence. And so when the UK invades into Ireland, the US condemns it, but doesn't do anything. And Ireland is fully annexed into the UK. And this is going to start angering a lot of the US's so-called allies. And they all start to kind of talk to each other more than they talk to the US. And underground, they will coordinate. The Brazilian puppet state will be leading these coordinations. Or these... what are they? The Brazilian puppet state will be leading these. And other countries that will be secretly trying to rebel against the US will include Mexico, Canada, the Dominican Republic, Spain, Denmark, Paraguay, Bolivia, Jamaica, the Bahamas, and Algeria. So all of these countries are basically coordinating to try and basically rebel against the US. The countries that are still in light green, or Argentina, who's in dark green, are going to stay with the US. They've been contacted, and these light green countries eventually alert the US as to what's happening. The US is obviously very alarmed by this, and so the first thing they do is they just want to do a testing thing. So they send troops into the Bahamas, and they're technically invading it, but the Bahamas basically is like, we're not actually rebelling against you, come on in. And so the US then just decides to annex the Bahamas essentially. And this kind of angers more countries, and specifically Peru will be convinced that the US is not worth helping. The US is still worried about this rebellion, and they know it's going to happen at this point. At this point, it's not a secret. It's still a secret that specifically Peru is in it, but not for long. And the US then decides to invade Jamaica, and they install a puppet regime there that's a lot more puppety, and the Yellow Alliance does nothing about it. So then they invade into the Dominican Republic, and once again, the Yellow Alliance stays silent. But now the Yellow Alliance officially declares independence from the U.S. and says this is the final straw. No more messing with us. And Ecuador decides to switch sides. And at this point, the U.S. is like, it's now or never. And the U.S. not 100% convinced that this is actually going to like fully happen. Sends troops into the Ecuador as soon as they declare independence from the U.S. And with this, the Yellow Alliance declares war on the U.S. And the rest of the world is like actually cackling in their seats. Like, how is the U.S. this bad at like keeping their puppet states in line? And I mean, they had a ridiculous number of puppet states, so this was kind of bound to happen. But yeah, so now the Green and Yellow Alliances are fully at war. And Argentina was ready for this, and they are still on the U.S.'s side because they're unequal. They're not a puppet state. And so they invade into Paraguay and Bolivia, and those two countries are very weak. And as for now, the real Brazil is still staying silent, whereas the big Brazil is like trying to keep everything coordinated. Paraguay gets a new puppet government installed that's loyal to Argentina. And once Ecuador is fully taken, it also has a puppet government installed. In Europe, the fighting is a lot more simple because it's pretty much just Spain versus Morocco. Iceland is also loyal to the U.S., but no one's trying to take them, and they are not trying to take anyone else, so they're just kind of sitting there. But Spain is starting to send troops into Morocco, and this is really the only front where you can really say that the U.S. is losing, because Morocco is not able to stand up to Spain, and the U.S. is not sending troops to help them yet. Canada has just invaded into Maine. There's not really many people living in Maine. And they also start sending troops into just like the middle of nowhere in the middle of the country just to like prod at the US and see if something happens. Mexico starts invading into Arizona. While Nicaragua, I believe this is. No, this is Costa Rica. This is Costa Rica. Costa Rica starts invading into the Mexican parts of Central America. Peru is now getting invaded on two sides, while Bolivia is also getting invaded. And South America, it looks like, is not going to survive, as a new puppet government is set up in Bolivia that now controls most of the Bolivian country. Suriname, which is an American colony, is taken by Brazil, as well as part of Guyana. And Suriname is given a free government that obviously joins the Yellow Alliance. But the U.S. is very much still winning this war, and now they're going to move their wrath to Canada and Mexico as they start taking out pretty much all of the population of Canada, which lives right here, as well as ridding their country of those pesky Canadians. They start an invasion from Alaska into Canada's northern unpopulated territories, as well as into Canada's southern unpopulated territories from their unpopulated territories. And with this, they managed to cut off British Columbia from the rest of Canada, and British Columbia is basically under siege at this point. The American Navy is over here. Spain continues to serve as the Yellow Alliance's best hope as Morocco fully capitulates. And so Spain and Denmark now begin sending their forces to Iceland, which is undefended because the U.S. is focusing on their homeland. And now they start sending troops into Greenland to try and liberate Greenland from the U.S. And again, the U.S. is focusing on their homeland right now. Speaking of which, they finally push Mexico out of Arizona and begin a long campaign down Baja California. Meanwhile, they are also pushing up into Maine and take a lot of the eastern Canadian colonies, or not colonies, provinces. British Columbia is still under siege, with Vancouver Island being seized, and yeah, British Columbia is dead. However, a big development just happened in South America, as the real Brazil will basically put India's alliance on hold for a second and join the Yellow Alliance to help them out. And they unite with the other Brazilian country, and Brazil is whole again. And with this, Brazil is going to one-on-one Argentina. So first they fight them in Bolivia. Why am I struggling to say that? Pretty much liberate the entire country. Then they start liberating Paraguay, and once they have the whole country, they fully liberate them. Then they start going into Chile, because even though it's more mountainous, these people are more willing to not be part of Argentina, as well as into Uruguay. And they also start being able to hold out against the U.S. over here. Mexico is not faring so well. A massive American force is landing in their country as Canada is kind of mostly capitulated. Although that being said, Greenland, whatever's left of Canada, makes a landing in Greenland, capturing Nuuk. And with that, pretty much Greenland has fallen into the Yellow Alliance's hands. But the U.S. isn't so worried about Greenland right now. First, they're worried about Mexico, making another landing here and cutting Mexico into two, then going down the Yucatan Peninsula before starting to isolate Mexico City, blockading the coast, and forcing Mexico into capitulation. They then start helping their South American brethren, and they basically destroy the Surinamese government and reinstate their own government in Suriname. And with this, Argentina starts doing well again, although they had kind of lost a lot of their territory, so they're not like winning the war necessarily. Brazil is not able to handle the north, as Peru is kind of the first one to buckle. However, Canada is starting to get support from these guys, and with the U.S. distracted in the south, they liberate their eastern colonies and begin invading into Maine again. And they start besieging Toronto in the hopes that the U.S. will leave it. They also slowly start pushing the U.S. back over here. Then, in a massive turn of events, with Brazil now split between two fronts, Argentina is once again doing better against Brazil, and they're starting to invade into the southern parts of Brazil. And it's looking like things are bad, especially after Peru has a puppet government installed, takes over the entire country. The U.S. takes over the entirety of Peru. And especially after Argentina reunites with the U.S. forces, Brazil is now looking like they're on their last legs, and the U.S. is not going to treat them so kindly. Things are going better in Canada, though, as the U.S. hasn't been focused here, and Toronto is pretty much liberated. And the U.S. decides to make a calculated decision. The U.S. decides to make Canada an offer that they don't think Canada will refuse. You leave the war, and you have the option, you can become a full ally with us and not a puppet state, like a full ally. Or just leave the war and we'll ignore you and you won't have to fight us anymore. And Canada will look at their options, see how badly Brazil is losing, and Canada will accept this offer. They won't become an ally of the U.S., instead they'll just become neutral. Following this, Spain will officially declare that it has won the war, and Algeria as well. Spain and Algeria are like their own thing, and Denmark. And Denmark will be forced to join them because what other choice do they have? And Denmark will kind of just decide that they're going to retake Greenland, and the U.S. decides to give Denmark Greenland in exchange for some reparations and some money. Iceland is also annexed by Denmark. Spain will annex the northern parts of Morocco, with the southern parts becoming a Spanish puppet state. This is all horrible news for Brazil, but also for Bolivia and Paraguay. And those two will surrender, not necessarily surrender, but they'll have puppet governments installed, against which Brazil can do pretty much nothing, as their entire northern coast gets taken, and they are remembering this war, and they try to do peace, but the U.S. only accepts unconditional surrender, and so they will have to unconditionally surrender. And I don't think Brazil is going to live past this war. And this is the peace treaty of that war. So let me just explain what each of these colors means. So the dark green is the U.S. and the territory they annexed from Brazil, as well as Suriname and the Caribbean. They annexed a lot of territory. Argentina annexed a lot of Brazilian territory, as well as Paraguay and Bolivia. And all of the remaining puppet state governments, as well as Peru, Ecuador, and Mexico, all have governments that are committed to integrating into the U.S. as states within a short time span. So with that, first of all, the rest of the world is not going to take too kindly to this. So you might expect that in the next episode, the rest of the world reacts to how powerful the U.S. just got overnight. But with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.